unsung itself. A lot of musicians were offended by the name because they thought that it meant that their career was over. So, I would try to book someone, say, Ohio Players. I remember that this a specific instance with Ohio Players. And I was going after them. And, they were like, we still play. Our career isn't over. We're not unsung. We're still relevant. So it was really difficult. And it was also difficult because so many of them aren't speaking to other members within the group together. So it was, with Ohio Players, I think it was two different factions. So there was this one group that was still performing under the name of Ohio Players and another group. So, one would say, well, I'm not going to participate if this one does. So it was, you're kind of navigating a bunch of different personalities in that way. But what would always get people to commit was because people they want their voice to be heard. They want to tell their side of the story. And if you make sure that they realize that they're in a safe place, that this is not to be exploitive in any way, we want to make sure that your story is told, then they will always, well, not always, but for the most part, you can get people to acquiesce. But it's really important to make sure to develop that relationship where they trust you, get to know them, take them out, spend a lot of time with them, really see what makes them tick, what matters to them, and then, once you develop that relationship and they really trust you, then it's much easier to get them to come on board.
Developing a project, a documentary, about just how incredibly difficult it is to be a working, part of the working poor. And I'm looking at it through the stories of a few mothers, some are partners, some are single mothers in the Bronx. And everything takes place at this daycare facility that's actually one of these 24-hour daycare facilities, because more and more people are having to work crazy jobs or crazy hours, really alternate schedules. You have folks like nurses and others that work, long night shifts, and you have people that work 2 29-hour jobs because neither employer will give them 30 hours worth of work so that they're not full-time and not eligible for benefits. And so these families and these children have these incredibly complex and in many ways disruptive schedules. And the other side of that is that the people who provide the services are part of that same working poor class. So you're basically talking about low-income or working class women of color on both sides that are sort of under these incredibly strenuous, working conditions that impact greatly children, right? And so, for something like that, thinking about casting, like one of the things that I often think about and I'm often frustrated by is like in the mother world, there's all the mommy blogs and the motherhood wars and all this kind of stuff, but those voices don't ever really reflect, people like me or myself or the community that I see myself being a part of. And again, thinking about not just in terms of race or ethnicity representation, but perspective and voice and all of those things, wanting that representation as well. So one of the main characters for this documentary is a young Dominican woman who is actually an adjunct professor. She's a chemist, but she's struggling because she's an adjunct and they get paid meager wages. But I also thought about really wanting a mother who had a child who was old enough so that their perspective and their analysis of the situation could be part of the story and part of the voice. And so I ended up, kind of working or casting this mother and daughter because the little girl is actually really interested in photography. She's 9 years old. And so her photos are going to be part of the visual motif of the documentary, of her day-to-day interpretation of having this like really kind of crazy schedule, and living between her home and this daycare where she gets picked up from, sometimes at 11 o'clock at night on a regular basis. Kind of curious,
just to be honest, have a therapy moment about fear. I want to talk about fear because one of the things, and this is the last time I'll mention white men in this room, one of the things that I'm constantly preoccupied with, and in you guys' careers and lives, I'm sure you've thought about, is this idea that when did you know you were black, right? When do you have to be so aware that it cripples or interferes with your creativity? And in many cases, I've had white male counterparts that have a freeness that allows them to make mistakes and experiment and really fail and do really shitty stuff and still get supported on it. And I don't mean just financially, I mean really supported. And in the face of that. And in a lot of cases, obviously, people of color, women of color, people who are new to experiences, don't feel like we have that luxury. We got to get it right. And more importantly, we don't want to be characterized. So if a mother misses an appointment, it's because she can't manage her work as a family member, as opposed to she was just late that day, right? So these kinds of things are symptomatic, obviously, of a wider world, but they're the kinds of things that may or may not stop a creative process or inform a creative process, try to make us seek a perfection that doesn't exist. So part one of this question is, does that impact you? Have you abandoned it? And sorry, as an aside, I'm floating now, thinking about how, we grew up, for example, in sort of a black utopia where everybody was black, the guy who robbed you and the guy who came to save you, it was, so we didn't really think about the white gaze, and as a result, we focused on, can I be the fastest in my class? We focused on our humanity all the time because our blackness was what we took for granted, and that we thought the whole world was black until we got out there. I still am not sure that it's not, but it's a luxury, right, to be able to have that kind of entitlement, and you can sort of figure it out and artificially create it in your mind enough to get something done. But I wonder how you grapple with that. And then part two of my fear question is, in full disclosure, as someone who has been in a producing role and in a creative role, and who's also got a lot of projects bottled up inside of me, I think of this idea of the sterile midwife thing, and being in a position of constantly supporting creativity for us as a people, but also for specific artists and specific projects. And one of my fears is that I don't keep a balance with the work that my voice and the work that I know needs to be out there. And I don't think, I'm not necessarily saying that one is more important than the other for everybody, that everybody's got to be just an artist or everyone's just got to be a producer or a facilitator. But it's just something that I'm constantly grappling with and fearing and having to say out loud as a way to cope with it. So I'm wondering, what are your fears in terms of the way that you work as producers and the things you're trying to sort of lose or master or control?
Well, I can say, as you alluded to, how we grew up. We grew up in an environment where success was the only option. We grew up with parents who said, to get the same thing as the next guy, you've got to be twice as good. I agree with that, but that puts a heck of a burden on a kid. And I became this perfectionist where everything, I had to look perfect and be perfect and act perfect and always have a smile. And I'm sure my nephew suffered from the same thing. And it created an anxiety in me. So I do grapple with an anxiety disorder. So you talk about fear, I can find fear just about anywhere. If I just start thinking, my mind starts going, and there it is. So for me, it's been a very real process to manage it. And meditation has been my godsend. I find a space every day, every morning. The first thing I do I meditate for 20 minutes. Every evening before I go to bed, I meditate for 20 minutes. And in the spaces in between, I carve out specific times and a specific space for creativity. And what I find is, with the meditation, it allows me to tap into that inner source, that inner voice, that, that intuition, and that's the birthplace of creativity.
That's fantastic. I would love to be able to find those 20 minutes on both ends, and I'm working towards that. And the detox I kind of do in a way too, but it's like daily, right before, the end of the day, like an hour or so. But I think that's really important. But in terms of the fear angle, I'm really blessed with the opportunity of starting my career at BlackStar, which was that safe space. I mean, we were able to work in all different levels of production and get all kinds of experiences without judgment and complete support. I can't tell you the web of people that just, bolstered everybody in that experience. And so that community, it has continued. So I still am kind of buoyed by that. Not kind of, I am. But, you had asked about, like, the first time you kind of noticed, this obstacle. And I think that right after I left BlackStar, it was the first time it hit me in my face. I went to interview in, BlackStar in Boston, and came to New York to a white production company. I had just won an Emmy, actually, for the research on Malcolm X. And research is research, You're doing a lot of phone calls. At that time, it's not internet, so you're visiting a lot of archives. And, there's a way to just, methodically go through that process. And it's not, whatever. So anyway, during the interview, it was on something like the American Revolution or something like that. And he was impressed with all the level of research that we'd done for Malcolm. And but then he asked, have you done any research on American history? And I'm like, and right then I knew, I was like, this is a different world.
You tell them you don't live in America.
I've recently become very bratty about my right to make mistakes. I think that I've grown up in spaces where I've always been a translator of blackness, and that is as you said, a really huge burden to carry. And it becomes a very resentful thing when you're surrounded by people who can be artists and question and explore, and you have to tell the definitive story, or the universal story, or the general story. Otherwise, nobody's gonna, or you're told nobody's gonna want to watch it, and that is a lie. And then there's also, I think that the ultimate result of the kind of art you make in that space is to constantly be explaining, spend your whole life explaining that black people are human and have a right to be alive and have stories told about us. You know what I mean? So I think, I just think there's that, I think Toni Morrison quote that's like, the thing about racism is that it keeps you from doing your work. And I think that's a very important thing that I'm thinking about right now, how to move away from spaces where people are saying, explain yourself, to spaces where people are saying, express yourself, explore yourself, and make mistakes and make another movie that we're artists. That's what we're supposed to be